IELTS Listening, version 55529. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet.
Part 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a park reservations employee and a woman who wants to book a campsite. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Nature Park Services. How may I help you today?
Hello, I'm calling to make a campsite reservation.
Great. Let me just pull up the reservation form and we can get started. Okay. First, could I get your name?
Sure, it's Sandra Kemp.
All right, Ms. Kemp. I can make reservations for the Northern, Central, and Southern California parks. Which region will you be traveling to?
Is Mount Laguna in the central or southern region?
Is that where you're going?
Yes.
That's southern. Do you know which campground?
Actually, I was hoping you could help me with that. I've read a lot about 2 different campgrounds, Sunrise and Mountain, but I can't decide. Mountain Campground has many hiking trails close by. But then again, Sunrise Campground is next to the lake, and my husband loves to fish.
They're both really beautiful spots. I guess it depends on when you're going.
Really? Well, we're going in April.
The thing is, fishing at Sunrise Campground is only allowed from June to September, so I suggest Mountain.
Okay, then. That makes it easy.
So we've selected the campground, so now we need to think about which sort of site. There are different options. You can stay at a cabin, a tent, or a recreational vehicle campsite.
Which type of site offers the most peace and quiet?
A tent site would be your best bet.
That sounds good to me.
So, if you've read about the park, you probably know that some vehicles aren't suitable for the park roads. Cars tend to get stuck when it rains. If you have a truck, you won't have any trouble.
Luckily, we do. We'll be driving that instead of our car. I hope we don't get any rain, but I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Perfect. I'll just need to get your license plate number.
That's QY0918.
Thanks. And what about your trip dates?
We'd like to stay for 3 days.
Does that mean you'll be staying 2 nights?
That's right. We'll be arriving on April 10th and leaving on the 12th.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, the park is home to some black bears, so you'll need to rent a bear-proof food container to lock your food inside for hikes. It's really just a precaution. We have small, medium, and large food containers for campers.
Oh, I'm familiar with food containers, but they can be heavy.
Well, the large one is, but if you get the small size, It's not so heavy.
Well, let's do that. I really want something lightweight.
Would you be interested in signing up for a guided nature walk on the second day of your trip?
What kind of walk?
Well, at 7 a.m., there are 3 different ones near your campground. There's the flower walk, the bird watching walk, and the waterfall walk.
Really? I love gardening, so the flower walk sounds interesting. My son might be more into the waterfall one, but I can't imagine him getting up in time. Maybe I could go alone. Could you sign me up?
Sure. Now, just a few more things. Visitors must purchase park passes as well. You have the option of the one-day pass, which would be cheaper, or the one-year pass, which is a better deal if you plan to go to more parks.
Let's go ahead and get that. I'm sure we'll visit more parks soon.
It's a really good bargain. Plus, we donate $5 of the pass fee to one of our 3 park programs. You get to choose which one.
Park programs?
Yes. Well, we run a youth program for local kids to attend a nature camp in the summer. The other 2 options are conservation projects. There's a wildlife program and a tree planting program.
Wow, they all sound worthwhile. What should I do? It's important for children to appreciate the outdoors. Let's go with the youth program.
Okay. We just need to review the fee and payment information.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
Part 2. You will hear a hotel manager talking to some new staff. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Good morning, all of you. I do apologize for being a little late starting our meeting. One of our guests has been taken ill. Susie, who's our assistant manager, has driven him to the hospital, but she was in the middle of compiling our weekly report for head office, which is urgent, and I had to finish writing it for her. Now, this is the first day of work at the Ocean Edge Hotel for all of you. Let me say something that might surprise you. You've all got a qualification in hospitality, and some of you have got very high grades. But to me, what counts most is that you enjoy the contact with guests and really want to make a career in the hospitality industry. You'll be getting some very valuable experience here, so make the most of it. A few words about the history of the Ocean Edge Hotel. There have been buildings on this site for about 250 years. We know that in the 18th century there was a bakery here, when the town was very new. The building was destroyed by fire in the early 19th century, and houses were constructed on the site. These, in their turn, were demolished in the middle of the 20th century and replaced by the hotel. I think it's fair to say that this is a popular place to work. We're always getting job applications from local people, even when we haven't any vacancies. And whereas in many hotels staff tend to stay for a year or even less, here 5 is pretty standard. And in fact, several of our staff have been here for 10 years or more. You're the first people we've appointed in the last 3 years. And we only needed to do that because we're currently constructing 25 new bedrooms. Depending on their location, hotels usually have mostly business guests or mostly tourists. We attract a large number of tourists who come to spend a few days beside the ocean. We also have quite a lot of people who are here on business and perhaps stay for 1 or 2 nights. What we've noticed recently, though, is that we're getting more and more regulars, people staying here for 4 nights every week because they have jobs in this locality, but live somewhere else in the country, so they go home for the weekend.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now let me give you an idea of the layout of the hotel. All the bedrooms are along walkways in the gardens, and the main building, which we're in now, has most of the other rooms that guests use. Obviously, when they arrive, the first place they find themselves in is the reception area, where we're sitting. The desk is over on the right of the entrance, and the office is immediately behind it. There's a connecting door from the desk itself and another entrance from the corridor. A lot of local residents hire the function room for parties and other events. This is right at the front of the hotel, on the left of the reception area, opposite the desk. This room is booked several evenings a week, and most weekends. It's a major source of income. Companies are very important customers for us, and a large number of local firms hold conferences here. To reach the main conference room, you go past the fountain as far as you can, and the door's directly in front of you. The meeting room is often hired by companies and other local organizations for small gatherings. For this room, you turn into the corridor at the side of the reception desk, and you'll see the room facing you at the end of the corridor. Our restaurant is open to the public, as well as to hotel residents, and I'm pleased to say it has a very good reputation locally. You turn left just before the fountain, as though you're heading for the guests' rooms, and it's the large room on your right. Next, I should mention that
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. You will hear a conversation between an art history student called Terrence and his tutor about the student's plan for a class presentation. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
OK, Terence. Now, I've looked through your preliminary outline and notes for the presentation on the art of the Ife region in Africa. That's in Nigeria, right?
Yes, I'm concentrating on Ife sculptures from the 12th to the 15th century.
How did you get interested in that? I know there have been some recent articles in the journals about African sculpture.
Well, I've read most of those now, but initially I got my introduction to this at a special display at the City Museum a few years ago. I just happened to be there and saw these works and thought they were fantastic. And I even went to Nigeria last summer to see more of them.
I've seen the photos for your presentation, and I must say the sculptures are gorgeous portrayals of what appear to be kings and queens.
Yes, I decided to concentrate on those as they're the most typical. They're interesting because they're so naturalistic, unlike the abstract figures we often associate with African art. There's also a lovely sculpture of a mudfish and one of the scaly crocodile, but I didn't get very good pictures of those, so I won't spend long on them.
Right. So what was the city of Ife like when these works were made? It's on the Niger River, isn't it?
Yeah. The boat traffic's what made it a centre of commerce then, as it still is today. But nowadays it's better known as the home of a big university.
Speaking of modern-day Ife, tell me about your trip.
I was incredibly lucky to be able to get enough money to go. My parents encouraged me, but they couldn't afford to send me. I applied for a grant from the Arts Council, and in the end I got it. I also wrote a series of articles about my trip for the local newspaper, but I didn't get any money for that. I was just pleased to get them published.
And the highlight of the trip?
That had to be meeting a professor working on the site in Ife who had been a young boy when they first discovered the sculptures by accident at a building site in 1938. He had been working at the site. Of course, I also got to talk to lots of artists who are working there today, and I got to try my hand at making a little sculpture myself.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Well, let's see what you might do to improve what you're planning for your presentation.
About the sculptures themselves, I think I need to add as much as possible about the details of the way they were made. Of course, I can't add anything about the artists who made them, because nobody really knows anything about them.
All good points. And you've certainly said enough about what the sculptures depict, what the subjects are. That's well covered. But I'd make some bigger photos of them so you can clearly see the fine detail.
OK.
And I would limit my personal reactions to these works of art if I were you. I know you think they're fantastic.
You're right. I'll contain my enthusiasm. What about the section of the presentation which I call history? I'd like to go into more depth about the history of that whole area, in the countries around Nigeria.
That would make the presentation stronger, but I think you've covered the situation regarding the rulers of the country quite well, and you've got plenty already about what the Ife people were doing then and the way their society was structured. And in fact, I think you could cut out the bit about modern Nigerian history because it's not relevant.
I agree, that doesn't fit. But perhaps I should concentrate more on the religious beliefs, since all these sculptures do seem to have some kind of religious association.
Good. I can lend you a book on that.
Oh.
Now, probably the part the class will find most interesting is the report of your trip to Nigeria and the research you did there. So I gather you managed to use the university library in Ife.
Yes. As soon as I'd explained why I wanted the information, that was no problem. They couldn't have been more helpful. There were some interesting accounts of how the first sculptures were found and what happened to them, which I want to include. What struck me when I saw the sculptures in Nigeria is the extent to which 20th century European artists were influenced by them. But that's beyond the scope of my presentation, I think.
Yes. What about the sources of the materials they used? You don't mention that anywhere.
I didn't manage to find out much about that. I want to cover the theories about who the original sculptors were, though.
Yes, the idea that a lot of them may have been made by the same person. That's very interesting.
It is, isn't it? Right, well, thanks for all the advice. Now I think I need to work.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3. Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture on the subject of why living in the city may be better for the environment than living in rural areas. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're looking at urban migration, the movement of people migrating from outside cities into cities. I think it's easy to jump to the conclusion that a rural lifestyle is greener. However, recent studies have suggested otherwise. First of all, if we take the land area of the Earth, the proportion that cities take up is a mere 3%, and these same cities actually produce 30 to 40% of the carbon that is released into the atmosphere, a lower amount than the 60 to 70% from non-urban areas. Anyway, let's imagine that most people decide to migrate to the city. What kind of impact would that have? For a start, this movement of people from the countryside should lift the pressure of intensive agriculture from the land, allowing forests to regenerate. Another point in favour of urban migration is that it can be far more energy efficient if services are concentrated in the city, for example. This is true for electricity and, as you can imagine, water. Then, once you remember that rural communities are often very spread out, you can see yet another green reason to live in the city. Rural citizens rely on the car to make their journeys far more than city dwellers, who have other more environmentally friendly forms of transport that they can use, such as buses and trains. The journeys tend to be shorter too. Yet another point in favour of urban migration is the kind of recycling schemes that can only take place where the population is concentrated. Take, for instance, Seattle in the USA, where methane gas is being put to good use and is generating energy for the city. It's produced from the city's rubbish, which could not be collected so efficiently from rural areas. Now, another factor that threatens the environment is the growing world population. It's estimated that 75 million babies are now born every year, and in some countries the birth rate shows no signs of slowing down. Urban migration may provide an answer here. Now, in cities, one of the reasons that women tend to have fewer children is that they get married later and start their families later. And the reason for this is that it's far easier to find a job, and once you have one, to get a promotion. So yes, the focus isn't on bearing children. Well, it would be foolish to pretend that there are no downsides to urban living when clearly there are. The thing that critics often mention is the idea that migrants may end up losing their culture, although some studies have found the opposite is true. Rather than give up their traditions, people actually work hard to maintain them. More evident is the fact that compared to the lower rate that is observed in rural areas, we can see that there is more crime occurring in cities. There won't be many of us here today who can say we haven't been directly or indirectly affected by it. There's another issue that we have to deal with. So many cities, including our own, now suffer from high levels of pollution so that the air we breathe is far from pure. And another factor against the urban is greener idea is that urbanisation often drives a country's economy. Put simply, when there is greater wealth in society, more energy is consumed. One of the direct effects of a stronger economy, something that many citizens will now experience every day and may well find stressful, is the amount of traffic on the road, despite the other options we mentioned earlier. This is a problem that is not about to go away, although there are some solutions that could be considered. Let's have a look at some of those.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.